You need a kind of, I suppose you need a brass neck to some extent, and you need a kind of a bit of drive about you, you know, to go and pursue things. You need to kind of ask people and knock on doors and not give up.
Hello, my name's Nathan Brake. I'm the creative director of VidMedia, a creative contents agency. It's my privilege to welcome you to Legacy Conversations. This channel exists to share the journeys of incredibly successful individuals, to pass on the lessons that they've learned, the mindsets that they've adopted, and the disciplines that they've developed in order to get to where they are today. My hope is that in sharing these journeys, we can learn from them and apply these same principles to our own growth in order to quicken it, so that we too can create lasting legacies. This week I'm speaking with Jim Spence, broadcaster and journalist, who's been in that world now for over 30 years. It's really interesting listening to Jim, hearing his story, the ups and the downs, and just what it takes to stay in that world operating for over 30 years. Enjoy. Hey Jim, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate your time.
Pleasure.
If you could start us off by sharing a wee bit about, obviously you grew up in Dundee.
Yeah.
What was your kind of dream as a young boy?
Dream as a young boy, I suspect, was like many young boys. I wanted to be a football player. But you know, my considerable lack of talent got in the way. Actually, I wasn't a bad wee winger. I was a flying wee winger, but I never understood the concept of passing the ball. You know, I was wanting to beat the entire opposition. You know, but you know, that was my dream, like many boys. But you know, once I'd wound my way through primary school and secondary school, and when I had to start thinking about the real world, there were two things that I wanted to do. I fancied being either a social worker or a journalist, and neither of the two options presented themselves. And if I'm being really honest, I had no real idea how to go about doing either, you know. And I wasn't one of these guys that went straight from school to university or college. I went straight into the working world. So those two dreams were kind of put on the back burner, you know. Although eventually, obviously, I ended up as a journalist, you know, a sports journalist. But it took a long time, and it was a somewhat circuitous route. So, like a lot of kids, I grew up wanting to be a footballer. Social work was in the background, but I eventually achieved something that, you know, that as a younger guy, you know, I mean, I read papers and I watched sport on television, and at the back of my mind somewhere, I suppose, I thought about it, but it never really entered the firmament. But I hardened up as I got older and started to kind of realise that there was a possibility of a Dundee boy from the schemes not far from here making it into the world of journalism, and eventually I got there, you know.
Oh, that's very cool. Would you be quite kind of competitive at school?
At football, perhaps, but no, I was very much a kind of Jack the Lad at school. I was, I just enjoyed life. I just enjoyed running about, being with pals, playing football, getting up to hijinks, you know. Competitive, I don't think so. I mean, I was brought up in a family where I was almost an only one. I mean, you know, I've got a brother and two sisters, but my two sisters were 10 years and 14 years older than me, and my brother was 13 years older than me. So kind of, I wasn't brought up in a competitive environment where sometimes you get siblings, you know, who've got kind of 2 or 3, and there's quite a close age range, and there's a bit of competitiveness. I never had that, you know. I was kind of brought up almost as an only one. By the time I was kind of 8, 9, 10, you know, my brother and sisters were kind of away from home. So no, I wouldn't say I was particularly competitive. You know, I was quite collegiate, you know.
Wow. And were you brought up, I've heard you kind of talk very fondly about kind of your family and upbringing things. Were you kind of instilled with kind of solid values?
Well, I was, my dad was ex-RAF, you know. My mum had, and you know, and like most people kind of back then, they'd come from big families, you know, so there was a kind of sense of solidarity, social solidarity. I was also brought up as a Catholic, you know. I mean, I went to Catholic primary and secondary, so although neither my mother and my father were, I actually can't remember the two of them, you know, going to chapel, although they were married, you know, in the Catholic Church and all the rest of it, and I think they drifted by then, but they insisted that I went to church every Sunday, you know, so every Sunday I would get the call I'd get booted out the bedroom and off to Mass, you know, and that happened until probably until, you know, I was in fifth or sixth year at school, or fifth year at school. I suppose, you know, it kind of seems to be a dying thing nowadays, doesn't it? Kind of folk being brought up kind of in that religious background, Catholic, Church of Scotland or whatever. I think that kind of gave you a sense of social cohesion and responsibility, you know. So I suppose I had that, but my dad was very disciplined, you know. He was very disciplined, being an ex-RAF man. He was a French polisher to trade, you know. In a modern world, a modern generation would assume that meant you had dual nationality, you know, but it was a very old traditional trade that went back to the 15th, 16th century, you know, a 5-year trade in those days. So he was very, very disciplined between his trade and his kind of, you know, his services upbringing. My mum kind of had my nature as well, but you know, she hard-working woman. She'd worked in school meals and as a home help, as they called it in those days. The sisters and the brother were all grafters, all worked. So you brought up very much with that kind of sense that you had to graft and work for what you get, and that friendships and family were very, very important. So there's that kind of sense of social cohesion and solidarity, I would call it, you know.
Oh, that's fantastic. And you said leaving school, you didn't go to university or college or anything. Was there any kind of draw to do that, or what was the decision behind going straight into work?
No, not at all. I just wanted to get into the working world and earn some money, you know. So I left Lawside Academy at the end of 5th year. When I got a job with Royal Life Insurance Company in King Street. It's now luxury flats. I did 6 months there. I went off to work for 2 years with what would now be BT, but Telephone House as it was called. I worked as a clerical assistant. 2 years there, and I hated it. You know, I some great company, great pals and all the rest of it, but it bored me rigid, you know, being stuck in an office. So I went to, much to my mother's horror, I went in, because if you went to Lawside, I went to Lawside in the old academy days when you actually had to pass an exam to go there, you know. So, you know, many of us were expected to go into greater things, you know, or at least very decent jobs. So I started off with 2 very respectable jobs, very quickly tired of them, and went off and drove a taxi full-time for a year at the age of 20. I was the youngest driver in the town. I had to get special dispensation. My mother was horrified. I learned singularly more about that 1 year as a full-time night shift taxi driver from 6 at night to 6 in the morning. I learned more about life than I ever have subsequently in any occupation, because you dealt with everything under the sun. I mean, everything. You know, you dealt with kind of the best and worst that humanity could offer. You saw some incredible sights, you heard some incredible things in a taxi, you know. So it was an illuminating year. And then I was always fairly left of centre in politics, and I couldn't settle. And I was kind of, you know, I was busy jumping from one job to the next, very often for a few weeks at a time, fighting the capitalist system. The system won. I went off to work in Jersey for 6 months with my girlfriend, who is my wife. We'd gone steady from, you know, kind of teenage sweethearts, you know, brought up the same street. And she and I went off to work in Jersey for 5 or 6 months. Came back, I ran a small carrier delivery service about 4.5, 5 years, very physically hard graft. And I was up a stairwell one day in the Perth Road delivering, as I recall, it was a bed settee. And it was, I mean, the company I did some work for dealt in really quality furniture, and this was a beast of a thing. And it burst open, trapping me and my cousin, who was helping me, up this kind of stairwell in Dundee. And I was pinned against the wall on this beast of a settee, thinking, I'm not doing this for the rest of my days. So I gave myself day release as my own boss, went back to college, did my hires, was accepted at Dundee University at the age of, I think, 28, 29, and did a law degree. Did the law degree and went on to teach law at Dundee College, mainly Dundee College, also Angus and Perth colleges for a wee while, and graduated from there after about 10, 11 years to BBC, where I'd been doing some broadcasting work anyhow, and I'd done some journalistic work anyhow, you know, with student newspapers and things like that. And I graduated to the BBC, and that's where I spent over 30 odd years of my life, you know, a wee bit more than that, in fact, you know. So it was a fairly circuitous route to doing what I've done, you know, and not one that I suspect that many people have followed, but I'm sure some will. And it's the classic example of kind of just follow whatever dreams you've got, you know, and get your head down and graft for it, you know, because that was what I did. I mean, I never really thought, you know, I pestered the BBC when I was at university for kind of interviews and all the rest of it, never heard anything. And then out of the blue one day got a phone call and hey presto, that was where the broadcasting career started. You know, so it's a long circuitous route. At times a very frustrating one, but an enjoyable one.
When did you kind of make the realization that you wanted to interview people, or that you had that kind of gift within you?
Well, I was nosy. I mean, that was the first thing. I think, as a journalist, whether you're a sports journalist, political journalist, news journalist, I think the key, the essential element is you've got to be nosy. You've got to be interested in life. You've got to be interested in what other people do. You'll know yourself very often. You know, you're speaking to people. You come away in a conversation with somebody, and you think, not once has that guy asked me a question about myself. You know, not once has he indicated any interest in me or what I might be. I've always been interested in what people do. You know, one of the first things I tend to ask people is, you know, what are you? What do you do? How do you get here? You know, it's. I mean, there are some quite intriguing things in life. You know, I noticed recently. You know, we live in very interesting times, and quite often people will ask folk, you know, where do you come from? What do you do? What are you up to? You know, and some people take umbrage at that. You know, I think it's, you know, we all want to find out about each other. We always, you know, not for any particularly kind of deleterious reason. We just, you know, that's what humanity is. We should be interested in each other. We should be interested in finding out what makes each other tick and what we're about and all the rest of it. So I was always very nosy. You know, I was always intrigued by many things. You know, so you know, it kind of very early on. I mean, you know, I said I'd fancied being a social worker or a football player. Neither of the two were kind of were serious. They were kind of things that filtered through my mind. I mean, I was a late developer. You know, if I'm being really honest, I was a late developer. So as I got older, into my 20s, I really started to fancy journalism. But there were very few opportunities in this neck of the woods, and my mum and dad didn't really know how to guide me on it. I didn't know anyone who was a journalist, but I found my way there. You know, and when I was at university, I started writing for the student magazine, Anisac. I started doing, you know, football columns. I'd go to Dens Park at Tardis and write a football column for them. And bearing in mind, you know, I'm 28, 29 by then, I'm a mature student, you know. And I also got involved in hospital radio, which I was, you know, with for many, many years, presenting kind of sports programmes and things like that, you know. So I just had that interest generally, you know, football and people. And I mean, initially in journalism, when I started pursuing things with BBC, it was news journalism I wanted to do, but you know, but I also was involved in doing commentaries in hospital radio, and I'd sent them a tape, and someone liked it and got in touch, you know, and hey presto, that was where the BBC career kicked off.
Wow, that's very cool. Was there anywhere you wanted to take more with the kind of law degree you done in the teaching, or was that just kind of at the same time, and then you had to choose between that or broadcasting?
No, I did the law degree and you know, graduated and went back to do, you know, to practice as a lawyer. You had to do a diploma in legal practice, and I did 2/3 of it. Went off for a few days to Germany to see Dundee United playing Borussia Mönchengladbach with my brother, who was 13 years my senior. I was skint. My wife, we had a mortgage by then. My wife was working. She worked with British Gas, and she was working and basically keeping me. I was a kept man. You know, in those days you got a small grant 3 times a year, but she was keeping the show on the road. I was skint. Really fancied seeing Dundee United. You know, that was. I mean, I wasn't quite involved in. Certainly wasn't involved in the BBC or anything then. My brother, who was a docker, had said to me, "I'll take you. I'll pay for it." So he took me to see Dundee United on a bus from, I think it was Dundee University, as I recall. I came back and I had only 10 weeks to go on the diploma in legal practice, and it wasn't me. You know, I just didn't see myself being cut out for a life in conveyancing, doing wills and trusts and executories. And, you know, if I'd practiced law at all, it would have been criminal law. I had a fascination for that. But I knew I was probably going to have to do another 2 years apprenticeship. By that time I was, 32-ish, something like that. 2 years apprenticeship in a stuffy office doing wills and trusts and executories and, you know, selling flats in Dens Road or, you know, Provost Road or wherever, you know. It horrified me, to be honest with you. I didn't have the brain for it. I couldn't see myself settling to a life in the office like that, you know. So a teaching job came up. You know, right out the blue, a teaching job came up. I replaced a fella called Andrew Welsh, who was an SNP MP at Angus College. He, I think, had been elected to go and represent the SNP, and a vacancy came up. He was a public admin lecturer, but he decided to merge public admin, which had elements of law in it, and law teaching. So I went off to teach at Angus College, and the Dundee College full-time job came up, and I ended up teaching law there full-time for about 10 years. So it was, and that was great. That was fascinating. You know, I really enjoyed that. And then the BBC thing came along. But then I was quite heavily into it. I mean, at one stage, I had a very good boss in the law department, a fella called Bob Lyle, who was great with me. Hugely intelligent man, MALLB from St Andrews. I think Bob was probably not particularly ambitious because he had as fine a brain as any KC or lawyer I know. I mean, he was, you know, in terms of the law, his knowledge was absolutely second to none. I mean, you know, my knowledge of the law was in the back of that thumb. Bob's was gargantuan, absolutely gargantuan, you know, and he was very, very kind to me. He would allow me away to Tannadice on Friday afternoons or during the week to do interviews and things like that, you know. But by the end, I was almost marrying two careers, and a couple of other things came up, and I got the chance to go and join the BBC on a one-year contract, on less money than I was on the teaching, and I did it. And initially it lasted a very short space of time because I actually, I didn't move to Glasgow, I was down in Glasgow. I was a late dad, had a couple of kids by then, very young, and I was travelling to Glasgow 6 in the morning, not getting back off until 9 at night, repeating the dose the next day. And I thought, this is not for me, I'm not doing this. To be honest with you, I found it intolerable that all the sports department was based in Glasgow. Scotland's a very parochial country. I mean, as much as I love Glasgow, my old granny is from there, it's an astonishingly parochial city. You know, it thinks that if something happened 5 miles outside Glasgow, it's not worth reporting on, you know, and I found it outrageous that all the reporters had to be based in Glasgow. So I left after 3 months and came back to Dundee. And I came back to the college to do some public relations work for them. And I was only perhaps 4 or 5 weeks back in Dundee when I got a call from the head of Radio Scotland, who suddenly realised that I had left. I was actually still on the airwaves. I was still working on a Saturday for them. I was still doing, you know, the Saturday Sports Round programme, but as a full-time reporter, I'd left. You know, I was doing 14-hour days and, you know, not seeing the kids, and I didn't see any good reason I couldn't be based in Dundee. Unfortunately, Maggie Cunningham, who was the head of Radio Scotland at the time, her husband had noted my absence and asked what had happened to me. And he was an Edinburgh bloke who shared the same view as me, that BBC Scotland was far too West Coast Glasgow oriented, and unknown to me on my behalf was outraged that I'd left the BBC. So she phoned and asked me to come back. And the deal that we did was she happily agreed to base me in Dundee, and she asked me to present the sports bulletins on the Good Morning Scotland programme, which was the flagship programme on Radio Scotland, from the Dundee studio. And that was how I ended up as a freelance, but on contract with the Beeb, and subsequently from there went to become a full-time staff reporter based in Dundee. So I was always delighted that I broke the back of the Glasgow domination. And I don't, you know, I mean, for any Glasgow chums of mine, and my granny was a Glaswegian, I don't mean that in any bad, in any, you know, there's no bad motive there, there's no ill feeling there. It was just that it was ludicrous that the BBC employed almost 1,200 people in Scotland, and 1,100 of them were based in Glasgow. It's outrageous, you know, for a public service broadcaster. So I broke the back of it in my own small way, which always gave me a wee thrill.
That's very cool. I love that story. Very cool. Just going back to that kind of moment where you first got involved with the BBC, I could imagine that was almost like a dream come true moment, but then the kind of hard reality of that, leaving at 6, getting home at 9, not seeing the family. How difficult was it to keep kind of living that dream but sacrifice the kind of family? And then how difficult was it to make the decision to family's more valuable, or this isn't?
Well, it's perhaps because I was a late dad. I mean, I was kind of in my 30s when I you know, had my 2 sons. So it was there was no choice really. You know, I mean, you know, I quite often found myself driving down to Glasgow and driving back from Glasgow in tears. You know, I thought I was missing my boys, you know, and I just wasn't prepared to do it, you know. I mean, you know, there are plenty of people and plenty of jobs, you know, from someone filling the shelves in you know, the local supermarket, to a bricklayer, to a lawyer, to doctors who have to trade things off, both men and women, trade elements of life off, you know, and not seeing their kids and all the rest of it. But when you work away from home, and I was only in Glasgow, you know, there are people working on oil rigs and working abroad who it's much more tough, and it's an individual choice. I wasn't prepared to do it. I didn't think the trade-off was worth it, you know. And it worked out, you know, it worked out for me, but it might not have. It could have been the end of the dream very, very early on. I mean, after 3 months, to be honest with you, I was probably extraordinarily lucky that the head of radio had realised what had happened and picked the phone up to me. A great many people wouldn't have bothered. I mean, you know, the guy who was my boss initially at the BBC was a Glasgow bloke. You know, he'd grown up, he'd been a tea boy at the BBC and worked his way up to a senior position in sport. long gone from the sports department now. And he was a good guy. He was kind to me, but you know, he just closed-minded in terms of that mentality that everyone had to be based in the Glasgow office, which is ludicrous. I mean, it was physically stupid. It was a stupid thing to do. I mean, there were so many football clubs up and around this neck of the woods, so many sports things going on in this neck of the woods. And actually, once, you know, when they finally realised their mistake, very often, as the man in Dundee, I mean, it kind of, they overcompensated, because I'd be sent to things in Inverness or, you know, Aberdeen, thinking, oh, Jim's much closer, which I was, but you know, it was, so it worked out fine for me. It actually worked out fine, you know, but not without cost or potential cost very early on. The career could have come to a grinding halt before it had really even started, you know.
Wow, that's, yeah, very good that you stuck your ground, and like you say, very lucky that it paid off. It's interesting when you're kind of talking and understanding, like the majority of careers, I guess people can look, this is the A to B of how to get into that career, but for you there doesn't seem to be that. So was there anyone that you kind of looked up to or followed or got advice from to be like, how do I get into this world and do this?
You know what, to be honest with you, no, there weren't. I mean, there were people I admired and people I enjoyed listening to on radio and telly and all the rest of it, but there was no one in particular because I didn't know. I mean, I didn't come from the kind of background that could point me in the direction. I had to learn as I got older, you know, and going to university and all the rest of it. For the first time, your eyes are opening. You know, you go to university, you think you're a reasonably intelligent bloke, you know, but you relatively quickly realise how little you know about things, you know, about a great many things. Particularly in terms of, you know, studying subjects like law, where a real kind of hard, logical thought process has to enter your brain, you know. And I think, you know, while I was studying law, that was when kind of, you know, it hardened, you know, the whole kind of idea of getting into journalism probably started to harden in my mind. But I also understood better how to go about approaching it. And the only way I knew how to approach it was to, you know, make phone calls, chap doors, and write letters, you know, and send tapes, which is what I did, all to the BBC. There was no one, I have to say, I had no idea, I had no real idea, I had no guidance, I had no great guidance from anyone. I just kind of ploughed my own furrow and dug away and sent tapes and, you know, and pestered them with letters and all the rest of it. And somewhere along the line, someone listened to a tape, you know, which wasn't unusual. That was one of the ways into broadcasting, you know. But what was really handy was the fact that I'd done student broadcasting. Hospital radio broadcasting and the student newspaper. I'd done those, so those gave me some elements. And it's one of the things I'd say to younger aspiring journalists, because now, of course, you can go and do a degree in journalism. You know, that wasn't available to me at the time, or if it was, I knew nothing about it. I think you need a kind of, I suppose you need a brass neck to some extent, and you need a kind of a bit of drive about you, you know, to go and pursue things. You need to kind of ask people and knock on doors and not give up, you know, not give up. I mean, I don't mean to be very critical here, but, you know, someone stopped me a while back in Dundee and said that their son was interested in journalism and he was in Edinburgh. And could I speak to him? And I knew very quickly when I spoke, eventually, you know, the lad, he phoned me about 6 months later. So by then I thought, he's not interested. But he phoned me and it was quite clear that you know, journalism was a ball that he was juggling in the air along with many others. Now, to me, I can understand people thinking, well, I do journalism or law, well, I become a bricklayer or a plumber. You know, I can understand. Well, you know, I mean, he just didn't know where he was going. And that's not a fault. I understood that. But I get asked this a lot. You know, I get asked to sit there with people quite a lot, or you chew the fat on the phone and give them advice. And you know, if you think someone's serious, not a problem. More than happy to help, because people helped me. You know, I didn't get much help in terms of getting into the game, but plenty of people helped me when I was in the game. But eventually he said to me, when do you think you could come through Edinburgh to sit down and give me some advice? And at that stage I thought, you're just at it, son, you know. So I knew he wasn't interested, you know, and to the best of my knowledge, he's never pursued that career in journalism. Because I think if you're going to pursue a career in anything, you've got to be pretty single-minded about it. You've got to, you know, you don't get up every morning kind of thinking I'm full of drive and passion and energy and all that. You do it. It's what you want to do. And you do it, you know, you do it. And I think those are the people that make the best brickies or joiners or lawyers or dentists or whatever it is, you know. People have got that kind of, that passion's an overused word these days, but that drive, that internal drive to do something and to do it well, do it to the best of their abilities, you know. And I suppose in journalistic terms I had that. My phone was never off. You know, my phone was on all the time, you know. Because I was nosy and I wanted to break stories, you know. And I think I had my share of them, you know. I still do.
I mean, it's remarkable how long a career you've had in broadcast and journalism.
Make me feel old now, you know. I know what you mean.
Do you think those elements kind of helped that self-drive, or are there other elements that you think about your character or the way that you would adapt or whatever that helped you kind of prolong that career?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, you know, I mean, I left BBC in 2016 as a staff reporter to kind of go freelance. If I'm being honest, it was kind of cutting back a wee bit by then, you know. By that stage, that's what, 8 years ago. By that stage, the mortgage was paid. You know, my two boys were kind of up and in careers of their own, and away from the house. So, you know, there are different stages of your life that you go through, and I want to be a bit more time for myself as well, because, you know, I have other hobbies. I cycle. I'm a member of a kind of, you know, a motor scooter club. You know, the old mods and stuff. I have a motorbike. You know, I run. You know, I wanted a bit more time. You know, I wanted a bit more time with my wife as well. But I mean, I'm still busy. You know, I mean, I still continue to do work probably until COVID, just the after effect of COVID with BBC on a Saturday afternoon. I still contribute to the occasional programme. I was doing something the other day for the Good Morning Scotland programme, and of course, you know, I do a couple of columns for the Dundee Courier and do some podcasting with them. So I'm as busy as I want to be at the moment. I mean, I don't mean this in any bombastic way, but I regularly turn work down. I mean, I enjoy doing something like this. You know, it's not paid, but I enjoy it. It's nice to do something like this, and you know, if it kind of maybe gives someone else a wee idea or a wee leg up, that's great. A lot of pay. I mean, you know, from here, you know, tonight I'll be heading down to Edinburgh to do an interview with and a question and answer session at a kirk with a pal of mine who's Paul Mitchell, who's you know, also a lay minister, BBC commentator, also a lay minister. We'll do a football night at his local kind of church, you know, and I enjoy stuff like that. But there's a lot of stuff that is paid that I just don't want to do. You know, I'm not interested. I'm not interested in the hours it requires, and I'm not interested in certain elements of it. Been there, done it, got the T-shirt kind of thing, you know. So I'm in a very fortunate position now. I can pick and choose, and that's a great position to be in, you know. But it wasn't handed to me out of a lucky bag, you know. I had to graft for it, you know. And then there comes a stage where, you know, if you've done it right, and you know, if the big man up the stairs has smiled upon you and you've been fortunate, then, you know, you're at a stage in life where you can afford to do that, and I'm at that stage, you know, and that's very fortunate, you know. I feel very fortunate to be at that kind of stage in the game, you know.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting as well, the kind of the enjoyment part, obviously, as a fan of football, but then the kind of work part of commentating, writing about it. Was there ever a clash of, I just actually want to enjoy this as a fan, or anything like that?
No, I think what there was, and to some extent still is, I mean, you know, I think we're all guilty, and I'm no exception, of occasionally thinking, it was better in my day, you know, it was better back then. Now, lots of things weren't. I mean, I had this debate with my brother, who's 30 years my senior, recently, who kind of, you know, postulated to me that this generation had it much tougher than ours, which I found to be a nonsensical statement. I mean, materially, that's nonsense, you know, and I've told him, materially, that's just guff, you know. I mean, it's simply untrue. You know, this generation materially are much better off than we were. You know, I was brought up in a tenement in Kirton with one coal fire, steaming running windows in the winter, rest of the house freezing. You know, if you're cold, you got a duffel coat on top of you in the bed under an old candle. And you know, I'm not going down that road of woe is me, or you know, in my day, you know, it's not that old Monty Python kind of sketch. You know, you think it was tough. We were brought up with a shoebox in the middle of the road, but you know, there are certain things that we're all guilty of, and you know, there's an element of me that thinks football was more enjoyable when I was a younger guy, you know, or even when I started out commentating. It's become much more technical, it's become much more analytical in terms of how it's played. It's become a wee bit, I think, more boring. But I mean, I still go to Dens Park Tannadice, you know, pretty much every game, because I'm writing a column for the Courier and a podcast about it. So I still go. But I just think that, you know, there have been several stages where I've thought this is not as enjoyable as it used to be. And it's not just the football. I mean, you know, very often, I mean, I tended to cover games in Dundee. That was kind of my stock in trade. But I mean, I regularly covered games at Aberdeen. I was often the pitch side reporter at Aberdeen. Frequently at the two Edinburgh clubs, regularly at St Johnstone, very often in the Highland clubs, Inverness and Dingwall. And there kind of comes a stage, particularly with, you know, the Highlands, where, you know, in a midweek game, you're heading back down to A9, and it's kind of, by the time you've finished the game, done your interviews and posted stuff, and you're in the car, and at 12:30 at night, you're heading down to A9, you're thinking, this doesn't hold the same attraction as it once did, you know. And I think that's the difference now. I can pick and choose, whereas I couldn't before, you know. Although there were a lot of reporters that would complain bitterly about being sent places, and they knew I was a go-to guy at the BBC. I would go. I just, you know, my view in life was simple. I'm the reporter. You're the producer. You tell me what to do. Don't tell me which questions to ask, but you tell me. You show me the gig. You tell me which gig I'm covering. And I've never been keen on that idea of reporters kind of challenging, the producer who has to produce the programme, you know, or the editor. It's his job or her job to, you know, point you in the direction of where they want you to go physically, you know. There were some colleagues that weren't overly keen on that. I don't want to go there, or I don't want to go here. There were a lot of places I didn't want to go, but it was the job. It was the job to do. I mean, I was talking to someone, I was on a cruise recently with someone who was a very senior guy in a news desk, and he was talking at a national paper, and he was talking about an older reporter who I know well, who I'm friendly with, and he would go anywhere, you know. Now, he was senior enough to say, I'm not doing that, send one of the juniors, but he didn't. Proper professional, you know, went where kind of the boss told him, because he, you know, the news desk editor was the boss in that particular occasion, and to me that's how the game should be played, you know.
That's very good, very good. And thinking back to kind of interviews, is there any that you kind of reflect on and laugh about, or were very challenging? What kind of sticks out in your mind as kind of key interviews for you?
I always, you know, I always got on well by and large with people in the game. And very often there were very tense moments where you knew you were interviewing a manager who was very probably about to be sacked, you know. Now, anyone who's, you know, anyone who's been a football manager, you know, knows that ultimately they will leave the job in one of two ways: under their own steam, or more usually dismissed. You know, it's the nature of football, and it was mainly football we covered. I mean, I did others. You know, I worked at Commonwealth Games in Manchester and Glasgow and all the rest of it. But you know, in Scotland, and like at Lumpa, and I had one boy who played football at a very good level, and another who was, you know, a Scottish cycling champion. You know. And I know the coverage that things like cycling got by comparison to football, minuscule, you know. So football was the number one sport. So it tended to be football we dealt in, pretty much by and large. So regularly, I mean, I remember interviewing Roy Aitken, who'd had a very successful career as a Celtic and Scotland player, and was the Aberdeen manager. And I knew, you know, Roy had been on a run. I think Aberdeen had gone 13 games, you know, without a win. And they were playing at Dundee United, and Dundee United beat them 5-0 at Tannadice on the Saturday afternoon. And I was always open with managers, you know, or players. I always tipped them the wink as we went up. You know, we would take at Tannadice. You would go up the tunnel onto the side of the pitch, because with a radio mic, you quite often couldn't get a radio signal while you were doing a live interview. So we'd take them out into the open, you know, shout through to the engineer, you know, I've got the manager ready to go any time. And I'd wait in the countdown in my ear from the studio, you know, coming to me live. Or recorded, but usually it was live. And going up, Roy had said to me, just before I got the chance, because I would normally say, look, I'm going to have to ask you about your future. You bat it away how you want, but I'm going to ask you, you know, that's the job. And most managers were fine with that, you know, because when you've been in the game a long time, it's difficult also not to have formed a very good relationship. I mean, there were very, very few people I can think I didn't get on well with, you know. That didn't mean you didn't ask them a difficult question. And most of them were mature enough to, you know, most of the guys in the game, you know, knew how it worked, you know. You can't be a manager and not know how it works. That's how it works. And Roy would say to me, don't ask me, Jim, don't ask me about my future. And I said, Roy, I've got it, don't ask me. So we did the interview, and there's about a minute to go, and my producer shouted in my ear, right, okay, Jim, ask him the question. You know, obviously the question is, there's a minute to go, 30 seconds to go, he's still talking, and I haven't asked him the question. With about 20 seconds to go, I start to hear what they call the sting, the bed of music that we play the programme out on, you know. And the producer said to me, Spencey, ask him the question. And I had to say, Roy, you know, you've lost so-and-so, 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 lost again today. Do you expect to be in a job this time next week? And boom, just as the programme ended, he billed on his heels and he walked away down the tunnel. And he shouted, you know, I'll not tell you what he shouted to me, but it wasn't complimentary. 15 minutes later, I was leaving the ground, and Roy's heading at the ground. See you later on, Jim. That's, you know, that was how it worked. You know, you could fall in and out with people, but by and large, there were, you know, one or two people that that tended to hold grudges, or you know, didn't like you, or didn't like what you asked. But I mean, I was fortunate, or I seemed to be fortunate. I mean, I had a very, very good relationship with very, very few managers who wouldn't answer my phone calls or wouldn't return a phone call. Very few chairmen who wouldn't do the same, you know. And you know, you dealt with them all. I mean, although I was based in Dundee at a national remit, you know, I could phone, when I did the Good Morning Scotland programme from Dundee, which I did for 4.5 years, I could phone Brian Quinn, who was the Celtic chairman then. Brian had been, Brian had one of the senior guys at the Bank of England, you know. Brian would take the call. David Murray, the Rangers chairman, would take my call, wouldn't come on the programme, but he'd take my call and, you know, answer some questions. You know, locally, you know, the various folk who've been in charge of United or Dundee would take the call. The Aberdeen chairman, Stuart Milne, would take the call. They would all take the call. You know, so, you know, I had a very good relationship, but it didn't happen overnight. You know, it takes a long, long time. It takes a long time before people learn that they can trust you. That you know, what they say to you, if it's on the record, you'll quote them. If it's off the record, you won't quote them. You know, so.
So would you actively pursue and work on those relationships, knowing that ultimately that would be beneficial to benefit your career?
I'm not sure if I thought about it in those terms. I just thought about it in terms of what I said earlier on. I was nosy, you know. I mean, the job was to find things out. You know, the job as a reporter is to find things out, present it to the public, and let the public make of it what they will. One of my biggest issues with some of modern journalism is that I think too many journalists now see themselves as activists. You know, there's a phrase, and I can never quite remember what it is, but someone said, you know, the job of a journalist isn't to kind of, you know, look outside the window and see that it's raining and report that. The public can make its own mind up. I'm probably misquoting that. The job of a journalist is to ask the questions he thinks that the public will be interested in and present the answers to the public and let the public make its mind up. I mean, you know, now, the problem is the job sometimes strays into other areas as well. I mean, you know, you're very often, you know, you're at a football game, you're asked to analyse as well. Now, you know, I wasn't I was a football reporter. I wasn't an analyst dealing with football players on the training ground every day of the week or whatever. I mean, the specialisms of the job, you know, were for managers or for the ex-professionals who worked alongside us as analysts or co-commentators, you know. I mean, if I did a commentary, and I did a few, my job was to describe the action on the park, throw to the co-commentator who had been a professional football player, the vast number of times he'd been a professional football player, and get him to analyse what had just happened, why it happened, why it shouldn't have happened, or how it could be avoided in the future. You know, bring that specialism to it, and I believe that should be the same in all reporting. I mean, I wouldn't expect someone to stand outside outside a court and give a detailed report of what had just happened in sentencing, and then offer his view on sentencing policy. You know, but the problem is sometimes in football that tended, because it's football and nobody dies. You know, I mean, let's be blunt about this. I spent my career, and still do, in something which is bread and circuses. That's the truth of the matter, and we take it far too seriously. You know, football is you know, it's hired hands, hired gladiators who come and represent a club in a city like Dundee or Edinburgh or Barcelona, wherever. They might have no local connection to the city whatsoever, but you know, they don the jersey, they become part of our dreams, part of our history, brought up under your dad or your granddad or your granny or whatever, and you know, and they buy it all that, you know. So I'm kind of wandering a wee bit here from the subject, but you know, I mean, you know, as a reporter, that was my job, you know, to ask questions that I thought that people would want to know the answers to, and then, you know, allow people to make their own mind up on that. And you know, you will find, particularly in the modern world of social media, that's you know, it's a very difficult thing to do, to find common agreement. You know, there are a million. There's a million football fans out there. There are a million views. You know. So.
Oh, very good. I love that kind of interpretation of it all. Very cool. Thank you, Jim. And then, so you had the opportunity to be rector at Dundee University. How did that kind of come about, and what was that like?
I was approached by one of the students, the student president, who was in his final, I think, 6 months. It was, I think, a 3-year term, or 4. I can never remember. It was no, it was a 1-year term, I think. He was in the final 6 months of it. Asked me if I would stand. I agreed to do it. It's a purely honorary role. I mean, you sit at the university court. You're there to try and help the students, you know, with any issues they've got. Try and raise issues, and they normally go for someone. Well, they always go for someone who's got public profile. You know, and I mean, and I was one of the. I was a much lower profile than many of the rectors I had. They'd had, you know, Brian Cox, Lorraine Kelly, Peter Ustinov, you know, various others back in the day. So I was quite low profile by comparison to these folk, albeit relatively well known in the area. I was asked to stand, and as it was in the event, I stood unopposed. No one else threw their hat into the ring, so I stood unopposed and was elected. I did 2 of my 3-year term. COVID killed it, you know. I was at a couple of early meetings, but by and large, you were doing meetings on, you know, on Teams and, you know, at remote distances and all the rest of it. And I felt I couldn't function properly, you know, and do the job properly on that basis. So about a year ago, I kind of, you know, I called a halt early on to it, you know. But it was an interesting period. I mean, bluntly, you know, if I'm being honest about it, I suspect 98% of students have not a clue who the rector is, what the rector does, or are interested in it, you know. So it tends to be activists who get involved in, you know, in voting and putting forward the rector and all the rest. So I did a couple of years of that. It was, you know, quite high profile for me. That wasn't the reason I did it. I did it to see if I could help the students. Would I do it again? I don't think so. I don't think it's a position that carries really any clout, any major kind of major elements of seriously being able to help students. You can raise things in the media and all the rest of it, but it has no particular clout. I think it's a historical anachronism, if I'm being honest, although I enjoy doing it, you know.
Very cool, thank you. And when did you get involved with the Courier?
Immediately, I left BBC in 2016. Within a couple of weeks, I had a couple of offers. Radio 2 wanted me to do something. I'd kind of, you know, I knew I was going to continue doing stuff for BBC, so that was out, you know, or I felt it was out. I mean, as a freelancer, probably wouldn't have been an issue, but I didn't, you know, I didn't want to do that. And DC Thomson's approached me. Both Evening Telegraph and the Courier approached me, you know, the then fella in charge, Richard Neville, took me out for a bite to eat, discussed it, you know, and was very, you know, was very kind of good in terms of, you know, telling me that they wouldn't interfere, I could write what I wanted and all the rest of it, and that's how it's proven. They're great. You know, DC Thomson's are great to work with. You know, they're very, very good. They, you know, if they change a word, it's only very occasionally, you know, and that's another intriguing part of a journalist's job. You know, ultimately, you know, you have a choice. If sort of an editor says to you, I don't like that bit, or you know, you can either strop off in the huff or say, well, here's somebody with experience who, you know, is looking with a fresh pair of eyes, and that's important, you know. That doesn't sit well there, or that word, or we're going to take that away, we can't stand it up. So, you know, they're excellent to work with. They're really, really good, and I've done that since 2016. I do a midweek column where they let me loose on anything I want, and at the weekend I do a sport column in theory, but it's always about football these days. I mean, I discovered very quickly that there's just not the audience. You know, there's not the audience. And I spent the bulk of my career covering football, so, you know, it's football, particularly, mainly, and it's joyous to be able to write about the local clubs, because that's where my main interest lies. Although, you know, with the BBC, I covered football in Europe. I've covered Celtic, Rangers, Dundee United, Aberdeen, Motherwell, Queen of the South, St Johnstone, covered all of those, and Scotland and Europe. My interest is local, you know, and it's great being able to get on a Saturday, knowing you're only kind of traipsing down the road to Tannadice or Dens Park, and you're not having to, you know, drive away down to Glasgow through Edinburgh or away over to Inverness or something like that, you know. So Courier approached me in 2016. I've been doing stuff for them ever since.
What does success look like to you?
Well, that's I mean, I can only speak from my own perspective. What does it look like? I think it looks like feeling that the job that you're doing well, that you're making a difference, that you're putting information into a public domain which might not have got there otherwise. In the current, you know, my current kind of status as a columnist, that I'm offering an opinion that I think, you know, lots of people would like to vent but don't have an opportunity to. And enjoying that. I mean, you know, anyone who says that they're in this game, that they're in the game of writing or broadcasting, and they are ego-free, has a capital L before the word liar attached to their name. Everyone in this game has an ego. If you don't have an ego, you wouldn't be in the game. You know, I'm writing because I think my views are important. You know, I don't mean my views are important only to me, they're important to me. But they're important, I think, because I think many other people share them. Many people don't, you know. I mean, there will people, I mean, I've been following, interestingly, the current debate of furore as people leave X, or Twitter as I still prefer to call it, you know, over the view that it's become a cesspit, you know, and many are leaving to go to Blue Sky, you know. I might well open a Blue Sky account myself, you know. But one of the great things about social media is you can have great banter on it. You can have a good laugh with people. I found myself last week discussing with a bloke in Wolverhampton. You know, some Dundee blokes who played for Wolverhampton Wanderers, and that's a lovely piece about it. You know, you find yourself talking to somebody in Canberra or South Africa, you know, who's a football fan or has read something you've said in a column and agreed with it, because that's the other thing. You know, the whole idea of a local newspaper now is nonsense. You know, the Dundee Courier can be read in Canberra as easily as the supposedly national Scotsman. You know, I mean, it's that world has changed. But success, I think, you know, comes from doing the job, thinking you're doing it well, hoping you're doing it well, and enjoying what you do. You know, I mean, there's no point in doing a job if you don't enjoy it. And I enjoy, you know, I enjoy sometimes stirring the pot a wee bit. A columnist should stir the pot. You should be, to some extent, I think, you know, you should be able to kind of throw stones in the water and watch it rippling out and see what kind of effect it comes from that, and just enjoying generally the cut and thrust of you know, of the debate that's provoked by what you do. So success it's an internal metric, isn't it? You know, and along with that might go, you know, making a decent standard of living, because that is important as well. We all want to enjoy a decent standard of living. I mean, and I've enjoyed a decent standard of living with the BBC without being a millionaire, you know. And as I say to someone earlier, I'm not on Gary Lineker. I wasn't on Gary Lineker money, but I earned a very decent living, you know. So success, I think, has to be, it's a personal quantification. You know, was I successful? Am I successful as a journalist? There are people I know who think I'm a numpty, a clown, a fool, an idiot, all of these things. And I'll never change their mind on that, and they're entitled to that opinion. You know, I may have similar views on them. I think I've had a relatively successful career in terms of what I set out to do, in terms of what I wanted to do. Have there been highs and lows? Have there been kind of disappointments? There have been some grim moments. You know, I had a really grim moment in 2013 with the BBC where I asked a question on air of two guests, which is badly phrased. That was my biggest regret. You know, during Rangers liquidation period, where you know, some people had said, I think I'd said, some people will say that the chairman who's coming back is coming back to a club that some people say is a club that died. Now, you know, particularly in West Coast terms, but in Scottish terms, that was something that evoked some really, really serious backlash. And I mean, there was an attempt to get me sacked, which went to the BBC Trust in London. There was a horrible campaign on the internet, some of which was utterly brutal. I sometimes smirk, not smart, that's the wrong word. I sometimes laugh at politicians who think that social media only became a cesspit fairly recently when they start to get, I mean, people in football journalism were getting this sort of stuff years ago, you know. And it was a fairly brutal kind of campaign. I did some work for Dundee United, you know, when I left some consultancy work, about 3 or 4 months. Quickly realised I shouldn't have done it. It was a stupid mistake, and everyone I knew I was close to advised me not to do it. And I got some serious abuse from people I knew for doing that, you know, as a freelancer, a living to make. And I turned in work with the BBC, which actually was a highly expensive financial mistake for me in doing that thing. And I got some kind of real abuse from a small section of people, but it goes with the territory. It goes with the territory, and I'm a big believer in giving it back. I'm not a shrinking violet. I mean, you can overplay this stuff. I mean, but you know, I kind of, you know, I was brought up in Kirton, not far from here, just a couple of miles up the road, and you know, it wasn't the Bronx, you know, but you kind of learn to fight your own corner. So I don't take nonsense. I give it back, and I give it back in double measure. I mean, you know, I don't quite believe in an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, but I'm not prepared for people to have a go at me without returning it in full measure. I'm happy for people to have a go at me, but if they do, they can expect it back both barrels. That's my view.
It's obviously working for you, so.
Well, it works. I mean, you know, there are. It's very interesting when you meet people who have given you stick. When you see them face to face, they usually become shrinking violets. You know, I would much rather someone said something to my face, criticism to my face, and none of us like criticism, you know. And sometimes we shrink from it, and then you go away and you have a think about it. You think, actually, the fella made a good point. Well, she made a good point. Yeah, I maybe made thinking it over, I would do that differently or whatever. You know, in broadcasting and journalism, particularly broadcasting, you know, heat of the moment stuff. You know, you will call. I mean, one of my pets. It's a minor thing, but you know, very often as a commentator, I hear people say, "Did you hear that?" He said, "Oh, he almost made the tackle." No, he actually did make the tackle. That's fine. It's live broadcasting. You know, we make mistakes in it. I mean, I've made umpteen. I've made many mistakes. You know, I once called a goal at McDermott Park, looked down to jot down what had happened, and when I looked up again, the game had kicked off. What I didn't realise was the goal had actually been disallowed. And I'd missed that and assumed it stood. And I asked the manager after the game about the goal, and he looked at me as though I had two heads. Made a complete fool of myself. You know, it happens. It's live broadcasting, you know. It's the nature of the beast. But, yeah, no, I mean, that was a long-winded way, but, you know, your original question, what is success? Success has to be not in the eye of the beholder, but in the eye of the individual. Am I being successful? I know people who will think, what I've done has amounted to nothing. That's fine. I would regard them as fairly sour individuals. I know quite a few of them who are like that. There is a tall poppy syndrome in Scotland. You know, anyone who has done anything in a career, there are a small number of people who would like to take the legs from them. You know, who does he think? It's the old "I ken his feather" mentality. You know, who does he think he is? And I think that exists. You know, rather than kind of seeing somebody doing something well, whether it's as a joiner, you know, a lawyer, whatever. Everybody's got a part to play. You know, from the individual that kind of walks away filling the shelves in the supermarket to the brain surgeon. Everybody's got a part to play in life, and you know, I mean, I commend everyone who does their job well and does it to the best of their ability. You know, I did mine to the best of my ability. You know, so I'm pretty happy with what I did.
Oh, it's brilliant. Thank you, Jim. And with a life and career kind of full of challenges and change, what character elements within you helped you kind of stay the course?
It's quite hard looking at yourself and asking, because you don't do it often, you know. I mean, you're just you. Every morning you get up, you're just you. But if you're going to sit down and kind of play Freud and analyse yourself, you have to look at your character, both your the positive elements and your defects, you know. And very often, I'm quite I'm seat of the pants very often, you know. I often say my wife would have made a much better law lecturer or law student than me. She kind of much more attention to detail, you know. I can skim the detail. I like the more philosophical elements of things, you know. But I suspect that within me there's a single-mindedness, and there has been I suppose I'm kind of. I don't mean aggressive, you know, but I fight my corner. I do fight my corner. And I like to think I'm hail fellow well met, but I just I'm not, you know, I'm not in the process of taking nonsense from people, and you know, and not returning it, as I said earlier on, both barrels. I think that's the thing that comes with age, you know, as you get older. And as you get older, you've had a few. There's a great Dundee phrase, dirty dichts. You know, there's a few things that have been done to you that change your attitude, change your mentality, you know. And I've had a few. The Rangers thing changed me dramatically. You know, I mean, I kind of felt for about 3 years as though BBC management kind of shrank back, and you know, while they were saying we back you, I always felt like it was the Homer Simpson thing as he disappeared backwards into the hedge, you know, and that kind of coloured probably the rest of my career at the Beeb, you know. I'm a human being. I cut and I bleed like everybody else, and I felt that, and I felt also that, you know, people I regarded as friends, I mean, I got very little backing. One or two folk, you know, got in touch with me. One or two very high-profile people got in touch with me privately, you know, to say they liked me as a broadcaster, you know, and they supported me, but didn't do it publicly, you know, because they were dealing with a cohort in Scottish society that was actually quite powerful. You know, so that shaped a lot of my thinking. I'm fortunate that came at a later stage. You know, I'd have been a 25-year-old, I might have been kind of, who knows? I mean, it depends on the individual characteristics. But I'd always got on very well with people and hadn't had any great issues. I had my ups and downs, but that was a career-threatening one. You know, for telling the truth on the radio. You know, not for telling the truth, for asking a question. You know, on the radio, you know, so I'm quite thrown. If I'm being blunt, I suppose I'm quite thrown. I'm thrown when I need to be, you know. I'm kind of hail fellow well met until pushed too far, then I become quite thrown, you know.
What do you think has been the biggest learn for you throughout your career?
In a working environment, trust yourself and only yourself, you know, and probably at this stage to assume that at some stage you'll get hung out to dry, you know, and to accept that that's part and parcel of the game that you're in. I'm talking specifically about being a journalist, but I think it applies to any walk of life. I think as I get older, I've realised there are very, very few people that when the chips are down, you can count on. So first and foremost, you rely on yourself and those closest to you, that very small circle, family, and the very, very close group of friends that you have that you can rely on, you know. So I think, and I hate saying that because I was never ever like that, you know, and that experience I talked about, and one or two others, but specifically that experience at a much later stage in life, a later stage in the career, kind of shaped much of that thinking, that you rely on yourself and learn who you can trust. And in learning who you can trust, undoubtedly, you will sometimes trust the wrong people. And then learn to roll with the punches, because you know you'll receive the blows, you know, and develop a thick skin. You know, you might bleed on the inside, but don't show folk on the outside that you are. You know.
That sounds like it's been hard to learn that.
Oh, it'll be no different from anybody else in any walk of life. I mean, I'm kind of reflecting on one particular, but some other specific circumstances that I cross paths with as a journalist. But everyone will have, whether you, to use that analogy again, whether you're the individual filling shelves in the ASDA, whether you're a brain surgeon, everyone will go through periods in life where things don't go well, where people that they thought they could trust let them down. Or you know what? Well, you let yourself down sometimes. I mean, so, somebody said to me, "Would you ask that question again of Rangers?" And it was only the Rangers on that occasion. Would I ask it again? I don't know. Knowing the grief that came from it, would I ask it again? I don't know. I honestly don't know, because it was just a throwaway question, and it created havoc. It created a period of havoc in my life. And I didn't always feel I was as well backed by those in charge. That I would have expected. But then, thinking back, those folk in charge also were under pressure. So you have to think of these things as well. But no, I mean, you've got to be single-minded, and in the nature of things, you'll get criticism, you'll be attacked, and you've got to learn how to deal with that.
And what advice would you pass on to the kind of next generation of journalists, wannabe journalists?
I think there is that great phrase, isn't there? To thine own self be true. I think you've got to stick with that. You've got to stick with your principles and your beliefs, and your kind of your internal drive and your internal kind of system will kind of guide you, I think. But also recognise when you're wrong. I wouldn't like to think, for anybody watching this, I wouldn't like to think that what I've just said was kind of some paean of self-pity. I made plenty of mistakes, and there are things that, looking back, I sometimes cringe at, and certainly wouldn't do again, and maybe wasn't best prepared for, and all the rest of it. So you've got to not only reflect, you've got to act on those reflections. If you've done things and you haven't done them properly, reflect on that and do them better next time, and take advice, listen and take advice from people. That doesn't necessarily mean that you listen to somebody and say, "Oh, right, I must do what you told me." You filter that through your own personal filter, and you try to make as much of that as possible as ego-free, and think, okay, is that good advice? Why am I getting that advice? Because people will trip you up as well. People give you bad advice also, And we're human beings. None of us are. We're all fallible. None of us have the answers to life. That's the reason that people go to psychotherapists and all the rest of it. None of us have all the answers. But listen to people and try from your own experiences to figure out what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong, and all the rest of it. But specifically in journalism, do the job. Get all sides of the story. Because there are more than two sides to the story. There are many sides to the story, and dig and dig and dig. I mean, it's one of the things I really grew to be angry about in modern kind of social media. Was this, things like kind of the rush to believe what somebody posts on X, or inevitably soon it'll be B-Sky, or claims that people make on the television. Don't believe people immediately. Just don't believe people immediately. That doesn't mean to say that you should denigrate or insult their claims, but always ask, why is someone making that claim? What's behind it? Is there personal vendetta? Is there, is it just ego? There's a whole load of things. Assemble all of the facts. Assemble as many facts. And we're all quick. I've done it. We all rush to judgment. We all rush to judgment on things, or we all take an instant view on things. But one of the things, to younger journalists, get all the facts, try and get the facts. And it's difficult because younger journalists are under much more pressure than probably my generation of journalists were under. They're under huge pressure, Materially, the world may be different, but they're also under their own different types of pressure. The biggest one, they're under are time pressures and getting out the office and actually meeting people face to face. You and I can sit here and chew the fat on this, and we'll get an indication from body language and body movement and all the rest of it. Eye contact, all of these things. How the conversation's going. Was there a wee moment there when I wasn't sure of what you were saying? That's very difficult to do on the end of a phone or on asking questions on the internet. Get out and about, meet people, trust your own judgment, but that judgment has to come from experience, and usually long experience. You know, some people mature more quickly than others. I was a late developer. You know, I mean, as a 25-year-old journalist, I'd have been hopeless. You know, I just wasn't mature enough. You know, some people might be saying all these years on, I'm still not. But you know, I mean, everybody develops at a different rate of knots. But you know, I think you have to kind of be honest with yourself. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Play to your strengths. You know, but accept your weaknesses as well. Not had many, but you know, also try to kind of, you know, try to be guided by what principles you have, proper principles. But assemble all the facts. You know, assemble all the facts, and do your homework. Do your research, do your homework, and then present that to the public. And if you want to be opinionated, then don't describe yourself as a journalist. Become a columnist, or describe yourself as an activist journalist. You know, that's fair enough. No problem with that. Somebody putting themselves out on the line saying, these are my views, I'm an activist journalist. But then also expect what you report to be coloured in terms of, you know, readership. And that's, there are a couple of areas that I'm not going to into here, but there are a couple of areas I've never pontificated on in my column because A, I'm still not sure about my views on them, and B, they are areas where I'm not entirely sure who I trust, you know, in terms of what's being reported on them, you know. So I think as a journalist you've got kind of lots of duties because you're taking stories to a wide audience, and you want to make sure that you're taking that story out to a wide audience, as opposed to offering your opinion. You know, you can offer your opinion based on nothing, based on how you felt that morning climbing out of bed. But if you're offering, you know, a set of facts, I think you want to present as many sides of the case as possible, and very often there are more than two. So, you know, for what it's worth, that's my kind of tuppence worth.
Oh, that's fantastic, Jim. Thank you. What are you excited for the future?
Well, I'm a papa. You know, I became a granddad for the first time a couple of years, about to do so again. So it's fabulous to see new life coming into the world. I've got two sons who are great laddies. I have a great wife. You know, we've gone study since we were kind of teenagers, young kind of. You know, I was at Lawside Academy. She lived along the street from me. She was at Curtin High, up the road. We grew up with a kind of lot of circle of friends. I had a great upbringing in Curtin. Still stay in touch with a lot of people from there. I just enjoy life. There's so much to. It's got to be an individual thing. So there are many people in kind of, you know, very tough positions and all the rest of it. You know, I've been there. I'm also where I am now. I count my blessings. I've been very, very fortunate. You know. So I just enjoy every day and whatever it throws up. You know, I increasingly as I get older, I'm a live in the moment guy. You know, I plan for the future, and we all plan for the future, and it's nice to plan for there's nothing wrong in planning for the future, and there's nothing wrong either in looking back and enjoying what went before. But I'm very much a live in the moment guy. You know, and I like to see, you know, I like to see people doing well, and I'm not just talking about, you know, doing well material. I'm talking about kind of you might always call it spiritually if you want. I like to see people progressing in life, maturing in life, doing well in their job, doing well in their chosen sport, being good people, just being good people, helping folk out and all the rest of it, you know. So, you know, I just kind of, you know, I'm excited when I hear a good tune on the radio. I've got a big kitchen so I can dance about, you know. Get a bit of Northern Soul on and dance about. The neighbours looking in the window must think I'm a nut job, you know. But I just, you know, just enjoy life. You know, there's so many people in throughout the world, and you know, probably not far from your own door, who have got many, many crosses to bear. And you know, I always kind of, you know, they always say once a Catholic, always a Catholic. It never quite leaves you, whether you practice or whether you don't practice, you know. But I just always kind of thank the Lord, if you want to put it that way, for not giving me a bigger cross than I can bear in life. You know, I've had them to bear, but there's none that have kind of overwhelmed me, you know. And I think there are some people who have crosses to bear in life that are just unimaginably tough. And I've had ones that have been tough, and I don't know whether I've been resilient enough to you know, to emerge unscathed from them, or nobody emerges unscathed, but you know, to carry those. But some people have got really, really, really tough gigs, you know, and cope, you know. So I'm excited about life. I just enjoy every day that I've got, you know, and enjoy the. If you want to be blunt about it, suppose, you know, the many blessings that I've had. You know?
That's really good, really good. It's really beautiful. You touched on the fact that you and your wife have been together since you were like very, very young. What's the secret, or what has helped kind of sustain that relationship?
Oh, I love. Well, I just, you know, now and again you've got the good fortune to have people in your life who are just good souls, you know, kind, generous, thoughtful, put others before themselves, and she does all of these things, you know. She always did, always a smile on her face, just, you know, kind of kindness personified, you know. I mean, I suppose I'm much more of a cynic or a skeptic than she is. I mean, she kind of spent the last 7-8 years volunteering twice a week in the food bank and Stob as well, at Hilton originally, you know. She did that for 7 or 8 years, you know, and only recently gave it up, you know. She just the kind of individual that puts people before herself, and she's lucky as well. She's got a great circle of female friends who are all very tight, you know. Who all kind of are all similarly minded. They're good people. They're good people. She's a much better person than I am, you know. But it's just, you know, what's the state? I often wonder what kind of people are looking for in marriage, because any marriage has its ups and downs. Any relationship has its ups and downs. You kind of, I suppose, generationally, I kind of come from a generation who, you know, who kind of stuck together much more tightly than, you know, than kind of the modern mantra of things are tough, I'm out of here, you know, see ya, you know. I think the biggest thing in life is, or one of the biggest lessons you learn in life, and you should learn it quickly, is the grass isn't always greener on the other side, you know. And I think that's important. You just kind of, and it's great to have somebody who kind of, you know, is supportive of you in tough times, and also kind of tobers you up, to use that old Dundee expression. He kind of tells you some harsh truths, and I get that from my wife, you know. I mean, I kind of, you know, I mean, I can be a bit kind of, woe is me, and I don't get away with that well. I don't get away with that kind of, I got it this morning before I left the house for this interview, and I was moaning about something, I was quickly put in my place. I wasn't happy about it, but I knew instinctively that she was right, you know. And I think that's really important, you know. That's really important. A relationship's just, you know, you've got to work at it. You've kind of got to work at it. But ultimately, deeply, you know, right at the heart and right in the depth of it, what sustains any relationship is love and affection, you know. And I think that, you know, whether it's two folk, you know, like me and my wife who have gone study since they were 14, or whether it's folk that kind of, you know, just met again, whether it's, you know, maybe a widowed couple who are finding new love, or, you know, new relationship, new friendship, because friendship's important, you know. I think that's, you know, we're human beings and we crave affection, we crave company, we crave, I mean, you know, I'm at ease with my own company. I mean, I can go for days and, you know, maybe do a bit of my boxing bag in the garage, or you know, do my Joe Wicks in front of the telly, you know, on YouTube to keep myself fit, or do my press-ups or my weights in the garage or whatever, and not leave the house if I don't have to, you know, and sit and watch a bit of YouTube, watch a movie, read a book, you know, fart about on social media, whatever. But then there comes a stage where you crave and you need human company. And it might only be half an hour, meeting somebody in Tesco, or you know, bumping into somebody in the street when you're out and about and chewing the fat. But, you know, human beings, by and large, weren't meant to be solitary creatures, I think. Some people can do that, but, you know, we need, and I think we crave human company and relationships and just to blather. You know, my old mum, God bless her, was 86 when she died. And, I mean, that's a fair innings, you know. And I kind of wondered, and I knew she was well liked and she was gregarious and she loved company. And I kind of wondered, you know, when we buried her, and she was buried in St Mary's Lochee Church, quite a big church, and I found myself wondering what it would be like, how many people will come to an 86-year-old woman's funeral. And it was mobbed. It was mobbed. You know, lasses that had cut her hair, young lasses that had cut her hair came, people that knew her from the multi-stories we lived in at the top of the hill town, people that knew her just from blethering on the street, in the laundry, you know. Huge turnout, you know. That had an impact on me. That had a big impact on me. That's 13, 14 years ago now. But she was gregarious, and like the old man, she I never heard her talking ill of people. You know, she didn't gossip. You know, she gossiped in the way we all gossip, just general blethers, but she didn't talk ill of people. And I think that's something that, you know, I try to do. I don't always succeed. I write a column where sometimes you're critical of politicians. You know, that goes with the territory. You know, you know, I think, you know, in terms of, you know, the relationship, and I'm wondering a bit on that, because it's a wide field, isn't it? You know, I think we all crave human company, we crave relationship, and I think most of us crave somebody we can be together and share our most intimate kind of lives with, and our tough times and our happy times, you know. So, you know, I'm very fortunate. I've got a great family. I've got a really great family, and for that, I'm very, very thankful.
That's wonderful. And finally, Jim, what would you like your legacy to be?
Legacy. My legacy. I would just like my legacy to think Spency wasn't a bad bloke. You know, really. I mean, I've had a couple of people ask me. You know, I've got a pal that I speak to every week from Glasgow. He's a great guy, and he occupied a very senior position in life, and he was also a sports psychologist, and he worked at a couple of big football clubs, one particularly big football club in the East End of Glasgow, and he's written a couple of books. He's written about his father in the Merchant Navy and all the rest of it, and you know, and he's always saying, you should write a book. I'm not interested in what I've done. You know, I mean, I enjoy what I've done, but I mean, you know, I said to you earlier on, everybody in this game's got an ego, some kind of ego. You hope that people like what you say in the radio or podcast or what you write. But I've not got a big enough ego to sit down and write a book and think or expect people to be interested. I can't be bothered. I live in the moment. Just enjoy each day. So, you know, I don't expect, I mean, I would also hope people get a good laugh. You know, I mean, there are some things that have been quite hilarious in my career in terms of kind of, I once got locked in the toilets at Parkhead live on air and couldn't get out, you know, and you know, I had to broadcast that live to the nation. I had an interview with a guy, Dusan Pernice, Dundee United goalkeeper, thinking he spoke English, and dug myself into a deeper hole as it became quite obvious that, you know, his Slovakian, as a Slovakian, his English was as good as my Slovakian, you know. So, you know, if there's a legacy, I'd like people to think, yeah, he was a good bloke, he was a good husband, he was a good dad, he gave us a laugh on the radio, you know, he wrote some pieces that we agreed with, but I've not got enough of an ego to want anything on my headstone saying, oh, you know, here lies Jim Spence, you know, what, you know, the nation must mourn. I mean, no, not a danger, you know, no, he wasn't a bad bloke, he'll do me fine, you know.
That's brilliant. Jim, thank you so much for your time today. Absolutely amazing listening to you. Just, yeah, so much value in all of that, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Legacy Conversations. I hope you've enjoyed it and found it beneficial. I'm looking forward to the next one.